Welcome to the broadcast tonight, an appreciation of a great lady of theater, playwright Wendy Wasserstein, and for her friends who remember her, her friendship, her talent, and her love.
Playwriting and putting on a play, it's like a limited collaboration. There's you, there's the director, there's the set designer, and there are the actors. When you write a movie, God knows what happens to the writer. I mean, it's basically, you're out of there, and someone else is directing it, and there's all the actors, and you're the last person to know about when it's finished, what's happened to it. Whereas plays, it's hands-on. It's a family unit, which you're putting on, and especially if you write comedy, you're in the back of the theater basically fixing that show every night based on an audience reaction. So if you're the playwright and you're sitting there and you're the only one laughing, the thing isn't working.
An appreciation of Wendy Wasserstein in her words and the words of others. Next. Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
No one from these isolated villages in China had ever attended university until the Coca-Cola system funded 1,000 first-generation scholarships for students to fulfill their college dreams, satisfying a thirst for opportunity. The Coca-Cola Company.
Charlie Rose on PBS is brought to you in part by J.P. Morgan Chase, providing financial services and solutions to more than 30 million consumers, institutions, corporations, and governments worldwide.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide. From our studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Wendy Wasserstein died a week ago today, on January 30th, 2006, at age 55. She's one of those people who, when they are gone, you profoundly feel something missing, more than you ever might have anticipated. She was a pioneer, and she used that pen of hers to write 11 plays and various essays, frequent articles for magazines, a children's book, a screenplay, a libretto, and her first novel, Elements of Style, soon to be published. Her first play was produced in 1973 and her last in 2005. Wendy was born on October 18, 1950, the youngest of 5 children in a traditional Jewish family that moved from Brooklyn to Manhattan. She attended Mount Holyoke College and the Yale School of Drama. Her first success, Uncommon Women and Others, came 1 year after graduating from Yale. She expressed better than anyone of her generation ever had what it meant to be a modern woman, and what it meant was that you could love children and family and others as deeply as anyone, and you could love work as strongly as anyone, and you knew it could produce inevitable conflict, that ambition itself sometimes has a price on one side or the other. She captured women with that dilemma, and she gave them wit and intelligence, and yes, often at times, loneliness and ambivalence. It struck a chord with those women trying to reconcile love and work with ambition and yearning by asking the key questions with humor and profound insight. Wendy was my first friend when I came to New York to begin this program in 1991. She made me laugh and she made me think. She taught me about the theater. She was one of the earliest guests on this show at a time when we needed guests, and I wasn't quite sure what I was doing and needed people who did.
It's always hard to write. It's always hard to be alone in a room and write, no matter who you are, and no matter how many plays you've opened and how many reviews you've had. What gets maybe easier is when you sit through previews and people aren't laughing, you think, I can fix that. I know how to fix that. Worst comes to worst, I've got a joke from 5 years ago I can pull out.
And can you normally?
If you're listening, sometimes, you know, they have a life of their own and you can't, but you can do something if you're working with good people. That's what's great about plays, because if you've got a good director and a good producer there, that's...
What's your weakness as a playwright?
My weakness is, I think,
Go ahead.
I'm not as prolific as I would like to be. You know, because you always think there are these people who get up and they write, and you know, I just was listening to Coop. Isn't he up at 5 in the morning writing?
Exactly,
Immediately I thought, well, I'm not up at 5.
Then he goes to the hospital and
asleep.
operates, and he comes back and he does his television show. And,
He does all these things. I write a play. I talk to my friends.
But I bet you every day you feel like you've got to write.
I do now.
I mean, there are not many days that you say, well, I'll just go to the park and have fun today.
No. Some days I spend guilt and anxiety because I'm not writing, but I do think about it. Yeah.
We would often talk about her family, her famous brother Bruce, the financial wizard, her sisters whose experiences filled her plays, and also her mother Lola, who loves to dance.
I know what she said. She said, my daughter doesn't have a husband, but...
Exactly.
She didn't find the right doctor, but...
But, exactly.
But she's gotten this now imprimatur of success.
Exactly.
That's not what she said. What did she say? She said, I'm proud of you, dear, and I always wanted... It turned out exactly the way I knew it would.
She actually said, is that as good as a Tony?
Which you'd already won.
But she, yeah.
Now, what does she think of your career?
Oh, that's interesting. My mother's a dancer. She goes to dancing class every day. Yeah, still dances, which is great. And I would tell you her age, but I'll just say she's in her 20s, which is interesting because I'm in my 40s. So how we managed to do that. But
when we met, I was the boy pressing his nose against the glass, watching a world I had hardly seen and certainly not know it as I do today. She was already a celebrated New Yorker, if not the first lady of the theater, at least the first daughter. She seemed to know everybody, especially in theater, film, journalism, and publishing. She achieved national fame for the Heidi Chronicles. It opened on Broadway in 1989 and ran for 622 performances. It won for her both a Tony Award and a Pulitzer Prize in 1989. The Heidi Chronicles was almost certainly her most popular play, but for some, not necessarily her best. Heidi Holland became a voice lots of women understood. Her decision to adopt a child as a single woman caused lots of talk among Wendy's audiences. Later, Wendy would take a similar route in giving birth at age 48 to her daughter Lucy Jane in 1999.
You have a new baby.
I do have a new baby.
Who came later than most women have babies.
Yes.
And it wasn't easy.
No.
Baby was small.
Baby was small.
Like
baby
really
was
small.
Really small.
Tiny.
Tiny baby.
Yeah.
Tiny
like
baby.
maybe a pound or something?
Pound 12 ounces.
Pound 12 ounces.
Yeah.
How's baby doing?
Baby's doing great. Baby now weighs 14 pounds, 8 ounces. I just took her back
Going
to...
like a little...
She's growing. I took her to Mount Sinai the other day to like the, the clinic there for her checkup, and she is summa cum Sinai. This baby...
She's big up there.
She's big up there. She's healthy.
She's graduating with
good.
honors from
She's
Sinai.
Graduating with honors from Mount Sinai. She's a good
So
little
she's walking
baby.
her... She's walking her little feet out of there.
She's walking her little feet out of Mount Sinai.
So she's now, how much you say?
She's 14 pounds, 8 ounces.
Oh, this is great.
Yeah,
So she's perfectly healthy as far as we know?
Perfectly healthy, good baby.
The next much-anticipated play was The Sisters Rosenzweig and was also about women and the search for identity and happiness. It opened in 1993 and had 556 performances and was also nominated for a Tony for Best Play. Later, she wrote other plays, An American Daughter in 1997, Old Money off Broadway in 2000, and Third, a play about politics and ethics in 2005. It was at Lincoln Center in partnership with a longtime friend, Andre Bishop. Wendy had what every writer dreams. She could write humor and she could write hard truth with equal impact. She could make you laugh and she could make you cry. And she had this rare gift of giving insight and expression to what you felt deep inside. She spoke for a generation, and she was loved by several generations. Wendy Wasserstein appeared on this broadcast 10 times. We remember her tonight and appreciate her tonight with a look back at the many times Wendy sat with me to talk about her life and her work.
You grew up in New York.
Yeah.
Your parents moved here actually from Brooklyn, didn't they?
Brooklyn, yeah.
And lived on the
local
Upper
girl.
East Side.
Upper East Side,
Ended
yeah.
up at Mount Holyoke and then sort of ended up at Yale. Was there a moment when you knew that what I want to be, what I want theater for life?
It was funny because I grew up going to Broadway plays. I actually went to dancing school
After June Taylor.
at the June Taylor School of the Dance, and so, and then my folks used to take me to Broadway musicals. So it was always, I love being inside theaters. I love when the lights go down, and especially a musical and the orchestra starts up. Except when it's your own play, it's when you get anxiety.
Was there a moment you knew you had talent? Was there a time? I mean, did Yale Drama School did they say to you?
More when I was in college, I took a playwriting class at Smith. I was studying to be a congressional intern, and I was going to the library and falling asleep on the Congressional Digest. And this was at Mount Holyoke, and a friend of mine.
That sent a signal to you that this was not a
Forget
career.
it. Yeah, and a friend of mine told me we could take playwriting at Smith and then go shopping, and basically. She said the magic word, and the shopping. The shopping in Northampton is better than that in South Hadley.
I got to believe you've always been funny. I mean, from your, and was it natural because it was a way to get attention? What?
It's a way to get attention, and it's a way to deflect. It's a way of sort of not answering questions,
yes,
too, as you
I'm
must
funny
have seen this. So, yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's a way of doing both.
Chekhov was an early influence. Mm-hmm. Why?
Still is. Because he's the best, I think. He's great. Because when you look at those plays, I was thinking my favorite play used to be The Three Sisters, and now it's The Cherry Orchard, actually. And it's called a comedy. And it's a very serious play. And I think it's if you can hit all the notes, if it's sad, funny, serious, and yet laughter. Yeah. I mean, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful character work.
Early on, it seemed, as I remember, and I'm not sure I'm right about this, so I may be way the hell off the reservation, but I remember that some critics said you almost had to tone down your capacity to make jokes in order to create better drama.
That's right. Yeah, because sometimes if you have that capacity, sometimes a character can become compulsively funny. I'll never forget Jerry Gutierrez, who directed Isn't It Romantic, wanted me to cut a joke. And I started talking about the zeitgeist of the scene and the hubris and every single pretentious thing I could come up with. And he said, Wendy, you just don't want to cut your joke. And I thought, this guy is absolutely right. I cut the joke, and then 3 years later, I put it back into the Heidi Chronicles.
But here's what they say about Isn't It You put it back, the same joke. You took
absolutely.
Now, is there, in a sense, a continuum from one play to the other? So a character's, maybe a personality that you didn't put in one character, you may add to this other character, and...
Yeah, in a way. Yeah, they're certainly not the same characters, and one tries to change that. Yeah. I wouldn't want to keep writing the same people, because when you're writing a play, those people sort of come and live in your life, and they're there all the time, and sometimes it's nice to let them go.
And how do you let them go?
Well, you start something new. I remember one night I was watching the Heidi Chronicles when it was on the road somewhere, St. Paul or someplace, and she got up and was giving her speech about I feel stranded, and I was looking at her, and I thought, oh, just cheer up.
Just relax.
Just relax, honey, you'll be fine. So, yeah, and at that point it's time to move on.
At the end of Heidi's Chronicles, I mean, everybody knows when she adopts the child. Was that, you decided on that early on? I mean, did you work towards that? Was that where you knew that character would end up?
I did, actually. I think often with plays, for me, there's like an image that I have that I want that play to go towards. Yeah. And I know that was right for Heidi. And I know it was also a controversial ending. But
controversial because
some people thought I was saying what a woman needs to be fulfilled is to have a child. And I didn't think it was saying that.
What was it saying?
I think it was, this was a woman who was making a choice in her life, and it wasn't, she wasn't going to stop teaching art or whatever it was. But I think there's a tendency, particularly among my generation, to say, well, when I grow up, I'm going to do this. I am one of these people. When I'm 60, I'll be thinking, well, when I grow up, I'll do these things. And I think what she did was she said, okay, I'm grown up. What am I going to do?
Do you remember when you won the Pulitzer Prize? I mean, did somebody call you up and say, what do they say when they tell you?
Well,
did they send you a telegram or what?
No, they call you. I was home. I felt like I was a graduate student. I was wearing a flannel nightgown and writing an essay about my mother.
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon?
Right, absolutely. Home in a nightgown.
That's what you can do when you're a playwright.
That's right.
You can sit at home in a flannel.
The best part, no, and you don't have to dress for success.
And the worst part is you're going crazy, pulling your hair out. And,
very frustrated.
But anyway, you get a phone call.
Get a phone call from the press representative of the play. Mark Thibodeau called me up and said, you just won the Pulitzer Prize. And I said, don't be funny. That's really not funny.
That's really not,
And also,
because you knew in the competition was Piano Lesson with August Wilson, and the competition was also...
And Butterfly.
And in Butterfly.
Right.
Yeah. And so you thought, I'll never win this. This is too
I had
tough.
Heard that I hadn't, too.
Oh,
I mean, there was rumors.
There was a rumor on the street?
Yeah.
The rumor was what, August Wilson or in Butterfly?
Well, it was in Butterfly at that time. So, but I had heard that. Yeah. And so I just thought, this guy's, joking. And then he said I should call the AP, call my couchoir, and I said, I'm really going to humiliate myself now.
Is it right, Mark? This is Wendy.
Yeah, exactly.
And Mark says.
Yes, you must do this.
So did you call him?
I did call him, and then he said, have you talked to your mother? And I thought, oh, good God, I must call this woman, because she's going to hear my name on the radio and think something horrible has happened to me.
This is the famous Lola.
This is Lola, yeah.
Yes.
So I had to call Lola.
Say?
Well, she was sort of,
she said, thank God my daughter does. I know what she said. She said, my daughter doesn't have a husband, but.
Exactly.
She didn't
has
find the
this.
right doctor, but.
But, exactly.
But she's gotten this now imprimatur of success.
Exactly.
That's not what she said. What did she say? She said, I'm proud of you, dear, and I always wanted. It turned out exactly the way I knew it would.
She actually said, is that as good as a Tony?
Which you'd already won.
So, but she, yeah.
Now, what does she think of your career?
Oh, that's interesting. My mother's a dancer. She goes to dancing class every day. Yeah, still dances, which is great. And I would tell you her age, but I'll just say she's in her 20s, which is interesting because I'm in my 40s.
Yes,
so how we managed to do that. But
she still goes. I mean, so
she still goes. Yeah.
Is she? You live in a bunch of overachievers. Your siblings, your brothers and sisters are overachievers. Your brother Bruce is a big Wall Street deal maker, right? The mergers and acquisition guy. You got another sister that teaches somewhere, or no, runs an inn in Vermont somewhere.
In Vermont, and my other sister's, I think, head of public affairs for Citibank now.
Yeah. So we're all doing very well. Is it because of your mother or your father's influence?
I think both of them, actually. It's an interesting combination of people. My mother's very lively and theatrical, and my father he's invented velveteen, flock goods. There was a color called Wendy Blue.
It was very good to you, though.
It was very good, hence the velvet. Playwriting and putting on a play, it's like a limited collaboration. There's you, there's the director, there's the set designer, and there are the actors. When you write a movie, God knows what happens to the writer. I mean, it's basically you're out of there, and someone else is directing it, and there's all the actors, and you're the last person to know about when it's finished, what's happened to it. Whereas plays, it's hands-on. It's a family unit, which you're putting on, and especially if you write comedy, you're in the back of the theater basically fixing that show every night based on an audience reaction. So if you're the playwright and you're sitting there and you're the only one laughing, the thing isn't working.
Why did you want to be a playwright? What was it about that?
I think, well, I grew up in New York, and my parents used to make me go to dancing school on Saturdays, which was not so great. but then they took me to the Broadway theater. So I grew up going to Broadway matinees. And like Terrence, fell in love with the theater. And to this day, when I'm inside a theater, I'm happy, basically. I mean, then the show cannot work and I'm miserable, but initially it makes me very happy.
Being there is the happiest place in the world.
And what helped me about Yale, the best thing, was meeting Ted, Chris Durang, Meryl Streep, Sigourney, Terrence.
It's the community, wherever it is.
It's reassuring to feel like there are other people who do what you do and have that interest.
And you get excited by their work and you think, that's really interesting, I want to keep doing this. It's not competitive so much as it gets exciting, it gets hot, and you think, I want to keep doing the same kind of thing. And a drama school, if it's good and there are good people there, can do that.
Make a difference being a woman?
In terms of writing, well, in a way, what I can tell you about American playwriting is there are different kinds of people writing plays now. You see different experiences on stage. You see more plays by women, more plays by African Americans. There's a whole, if you look at, who won the Pulitzer Prizes in the 80s, and August Wilson and Marcia Norman, and there's a whole other voices coming in, which I think will make the theater much richer. Make it seem less of a maybe elitist art form too. What you can do is teach people to have confidence in their own gift. What you do is to teach them to believe in their own voices. What you can't do is say, okay, baby, on the third line I want to laugh, boom, and bring on the dancing girls. That way, I mean, anyone who sits down to write a commercial play, I think
And you teach them to believe in their own voices.
I think so. And that there are stories to tell, and that whatever story they have to tell, if they tell it honestly, is worth something. I mean, there's craft that you can teach. And how to shape a scene in some ways. But mostly it has to do with honesty. I think partially growing up in New York and going to the theater influenced me a lot. I think my friends, my colleagues in the theater.
When did you know you had something? I mean, that Wendy had something that,
God, you never know. I mean, at some point, I remember when we were doing Uncommon Women in New York.
Right here at public television.
Public television.
And Jack Venza was, right.
Which Jack produced, and it was a lot of ours first show in New York, or beginnings of a career. And Swoosie Kurtz was in it, and Meryl Streep, and Jill Eikenberry, and it was all sort of starting out. And I remember thinking to myself, well, either this is going to go, or I'm seriously going to consider my father's velveteen business.
You'll say
so,
that's right. So this will know. And so when Uncommon Woman was successful, did you sort of walk down the street and say, I'm a playwright. I'm a playwright.
Yeah.
And that I can make a living, I think. Doing this.
Yeah. But you do know it's very exciting.
Yeah. Could you teach, have you ever taught classes?
Yeah.
You have. You were nervous tonight. I mean, is it the nervous of this is something you have come to create and to produce, and you don't know, what is it? What's that nervousness?
I always think with plays, on a scale from 1 to 10, you care 10. And if you don't,
It's not going to be any good.
it's not going to be any good. You just have to.
Yeah.
So you just care that much.
Notwithstanding everybody who you've been in preview, audience
Right.
have been loving this. I mean, I'm gushing about this because everybody else is gushing, and I
Right.
hadn't seen it. Notwithstanding that everybody said it's great. Notwithstanding Andre Bishop, the artistic director,
Right.
says, Wendy, it's good. After he said
Right.
faster and louder,
Right.
he said it's good.
Right.
Notwithstanding all that, what was the nagging feeling that something might go wrong was what?
You just don't know. I mean, I think it's the excitement because it's live.
Yeah.
You know how in movies they say we have it in the can?
Yeah.
The great thing about plays is it's never in the can. It's always what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's always live.
Was the performance tonight as good as you have seen?
It's
Because
great.
people were saying this was better than they'd seen ever. People have seen it 3 or 4 times.
No, tonight they were hot. You know,
Yeah.
you get a hot night and it's great.
And that's what the magic of the theater is, that each night it's different, depending on the audience reaction, what's special
Oh,
about
absolutely.
that kind of
But I
thing.
knew it because backstage the actors were singing before they went on.
What, other than a great emotional evening, what do you want the people to leave this play? Where, thinking, feeling, experience?
I keep thinking about what they taught us at the Yale School of Drama
What did
about
they tell
pity
you?
and terror.
Yeah, what? What did they tell you, other than faster and quicker? What?
Faster and louder and pity and terror.
And what's pity and terror?
Oh, I don't know. You're supposed to be moved.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, what you try to do, at least in this play, is, you
Yeah.
laugh, you cry, you love
Yeah.
it. But basically that you take people and as a comedy, but then you move them to places emotionally.
Give me some sense about the creative process for you, from the germination of the idea to now you are at the stage where you have finished it, you've done the playwright's work, and now you began to have actors read it, and you began the shaping form and the shaping of it and the reducing of it that leads to something that will be seen on opening night.
I always think plays have a life of their own,
Yeah.
that each one sort of has its own, to be pretentious, journey. Even the Heidi Chronicles, which was a play, like I said, I started writing because it was in the mid-'80s, and all of these people I knew from the late 60s who were protesting or whatever, or, Nader Raiders, were suddenly talking about how to decorate their
Right.
second homes in the Hamptons, and I thought, this isn't making any sense to me.
Right.
I can't follow what's happening here. So sometimes you
Didn't
write...
compute, did it?
It didn't compute, Charlie. I couldn't make sense out of it.
Why, oh why?
Why, oh, why? And I thought, how is everybody changing? What's the through line here?
Yeah.
So sometimes you write things to sort of figure them out for yourself.
So the act of writing is a journey for you to answer questions.
Yes, and a form of sort of organizing it for myself.
Interesting you say that. Michael Crichton was here not long ago, and a very commercially successful writer, but
Right.
who takes his writing very seriously and works enormous. I mean, he's a prodigious worker, as
Yes.
his output suggests.
Right.
And he says he starts everything with a question, and in finding the answer to that, he finds his book.
I always know where the play is going to land. Like with the Heidi Chronicles, I thought I want a woman in front of a women's meeting to get up and say, I've never been so unhappy.
Yeah.
I just thought, and with the Sisters Rosenzweig, I wanted a 54-year-old woman to turn to someone, a woman who was closed off, to say, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone. Because I thought, and if I know where it's going in that way, I think I can build the play
Do
around
you know
it.
where it's going before you start writing?
I have a bit of an idea. I don't write from an outline. I'm much more interested in character than I am in story. Maybe it's because I'm a comedic writer. I'm also interested in...
Yeah.
I like the laughs, Charlie.
How do you feel when you listen to your words as these people
You
shape
know
them?
what? You feel unbelievably nervous before you get there, and you think, this is crazy. Why have I done this to myself? This is so scary. And then you feel really lucky that you know them. I
Yeah.
mean, and you feel really lucky that you get to do in life what you really want to do.
Yeah.
And it makes you want to make it better.
Why is writing plays so fulfilling for you? Because you can answer the questions you have about life.
Because you can answer those questions, because it's still, you know what amazes me? That a person sits in a room, writes this thing by themselves, doesn't
Yeah.
take 50,000 meetings with 40,000 different things.
That would appeal to me too. Yeah.
If you're working with really good actors, then they become that character, and
Yeah.
then they know things about it you don't know. And that's really good. Then you're sort of cooking. And that you don't get when you're writing a novel.
If you wrote a novel it would be character-driven because that's what turns you on.
Yeah, it would
rather
be.
Than plot-driven.
Although I once had a book of essays published, and when you write a play, you can go visit your play.
Yeah.
You go visit the actors. They tell you the gossip. You can watch the audience. It's different when you write a book.
Why do you always write about the lives of women?
I don't know. I think it's still. Maybe it's one way of trying to work things out for myself. Maybe it's also a way of giving parts to actresses. Maybe because I think the theatricality of it is interesting and not explored. Maybe because they're not put on stage in so many ways in Hollywood.
I think about when I ask you that question, the women all over in the theater and in the world of drama and theater and television are saying, for goodness sakes, don't stifle her, because that's the one thing we need is more women writing more interesting women's parts.
Definitely. I think so.
And you see all these talented people, I mean, and the people that you know and that were with you at Yale, either a year ahead or, I mean, people like Meryl Streep and Sigourney Weaver, and you could tell many more, you know, who I guess the one thing they want to see is more interesting parts, and especially more interesting parts for women who are growing.
Absolutely.
You know,
parts
growing up and maturing and getting older and having family and different kinds of experiences, you know.
I think so.
Tell me about your Yale experiences. MFA 1976.
I think it was when I applied to drama school. I mean, certainly my parents didn't say to me, Wendy, darling, please become a not-for-profit theater writer. That was not. I mean, I applied to drama school and business school and thought, whatever happens to me, that's what I'll do. I don't know. And
you should have gotten a double major.
I should have.
Then.
I think the most important thing to me was the people I went to school with, because I was there the same time as Christopher Durang and Meryl Streep and Sigourney Weaver and Ted Talley. And I think it's that feeling, because I do think it's hard in life to say, oh, I want to work in the theater, that's what I want to do. And then suddenly you're in this community of other like-minded people. Yeah. And I think that makes an enormous difference.
So it's not so much what you learn there, but who you're associated with and what's in the air?
What's in the air and sort of forming an aesthetic along with people who have a similar aesthetic. I do remember the first day of school, Christopher Durang came up to me and said, "You look so bored, you must be very bright." And I lifted that line. Actually, it's in the Heidi Chronicles. It's the first line where Peter meets Heidi, because I've always remembered that. But I've always thought it was those sort of friendships, because it's not just friendships, it's also a way of seeing the world and a way of checking, in a sense, that you're growing.
Joining me now to discuss the life and work of my friend Wendy Wasserstein are some of her best friends and colleagues. Andre Bishop, former artistic director of Playwrights Horizons, and now artistic director at Lincoln Center Theater. Playwright Christopher Durang. Frank Rich, author and columnist for the New York Times, and film producer Jane Rosenthal. I am pleased to have them here to celebrate a friendship and to remember someone whose death has meant more than I think any of us ever realized. And you see it in the outpouring of feelings and affection, not only in this city and in this country, but around the world. You were telling me, Andre, as we sat down, that you're stunned by people and what the worldwide reaction is.
Well, I thought I knew Wendy pretty well, but I didn't think I was prepared. I don't think any of us were for the outpouring from all over, everywhere, just as you said. I mean, at Lincoln Center Theater, because people have no place else to call, we have literally gotten hundreds and hundreds of phone calls and emails and letters for the past few days since she died. She touched everyone all over in so many areas of life, and I feel like a total idiot because I knew she was great, but she's great.
Well, what is that greatness about? What do you think that has sort of touched a nerve that somebody really special has left us?
Well, I think, while she obviously was a terrific playwright and wrote plays that I think spoke for many women and men of her generation, which is a very big the boomer generation, she was a public personality. Part of it was because she was accessible on shows like yours, for instance, but also
10 appearances on this show.
Yeah, amazing, and for a playwright, but also she just reached out to people of all kinds. Part of it was by things she did, like start a program like Open Doors for inner city high school kids to go to the theater. But what I've found in a lot of the emails I've gotten over the past few days from people who didn't know her and just were writing me because they knew I knew her, there was a very common strain. They had met Wendy somewhere once. They had been seated next to her at a theater, or they'd met her at a book party, or they'd met her at some event, and they all said, that she made such an impression on them because she was so lovely, she was outgoing, she asked them about themselves, she said something funny, she was charming, she engaged people everywhere she went, and
what was that infection about? That infectious laugh that she had, the sense that she was caring, the sense that she was...
The laugh, of course, was infectious. She's very warm. She did care about other people a lot. She had this great quality of empathy, which is very much in her writing as well. And, of course, some of her writing was not for the theater, was very personal, including her essay for the New Yorker about giving birth to a child in her late 40s. So people felt they owned a piece of her. They felt they knew her, and maybe they didn't, but she did nothing to put a barrier between herself and other people.
When did you first know her, Chris?
We met at Yale School of Drama, and I'm slightly proud that my line upon meeting her is quoted in the Heidi Chronicles.
It's great. Tell me what it was.
I'm 2 years older than Wendy, and I was already in the school, and I was working in the registrar's office, and so I got to see the upcoming applications, and somebody told me that Wendy Wasserstein was very talented, and she'd written a play called Any Woman Can't. And I looked at her application, and although as we got to know her, she was so friendly, I think in college she was a little sulkier. In any case, her picture she looked very hostile, and her recommendations were the playwright Israel Horowitz and the novelist Joseph Heller, and I thought, good God, how did she get to know them so soon? And I thought, oh, she seems slightly scary to me. But then I read her play, actually, and it was delightful and funny, and she definitely had a sense of humor, so I thought, oh, well, okay, I guess she mustn't be quite like that picture. And then the first class we were in together, the playwrights, even though we were in different years, we took classes together. It was my second year at Yale, and although I had a great time at Yale School of Drama, I did learn that not all the classes were wonderful. And what was wonderful was getting to know the actors and the directors, and also that the school encouraged you to do production. In any case, Wendy and I were in a class of a visiting person just a little bit older than us who was a playwright, and as a second-year student, I thought to myself, this isn't going to be so hot. And Wendy was sitting there just looking so bored, and because I had read her play and liked it, as we left, I said, you must be very smart to be bored so quickly. And she looked at me and she smiled and laughed her head off.
And that made it die.
And we went out to coffee, and we just were very close friends for such a long time. So that's how.
Yeah, when I first met her, she was my first friend when I came to New York in 1991, and she would talk about her friend Chris all the time. Where did your friendship come from?
I was working at CBS doing television movies in Los Angeles, and it's 1979, and I was doing anything possible to make business trips back to New York. So I ended up hiring Wendy and Peter Parnell, another great friend of hers, to write a television movie, and it was called Roommates But Not Lovers. The movie never was made for television, and Wendy and I became sort of the bestest of friends after that.
What made her a good friend?
She listened. She was, we could just talk about anything. I mean, it was, she was, Wendy just related. I mean, we talked about, whether or not, we talked about being single, we talked about dating, we talked about everything.
A lot about that.
It was a lot about that. Shoes, shopping. I mean, we just became really good girlfriends.
She's incredibly loyal. I met her before the 13 years I spent as the Times drama critic, which meant I never reviewed her, but also meant that she could go with me to the theater. And to me, if you're a drama critic, the definition of a friend is a person who will say they'll go to the show without asking what it is first.
That's great.
And so there was one year, I remember we called it our M year, where we saw in succession Moose Murders, Merlin, Marlowe, a musical about Christopher Marlowe. She would go to the most ridiculous things. She'd always be there loyally. It was, I in fact, when I collected my reviews of the book, I dedicated it to her because it was, almost like a Medal of Honor and award to have gone to so much bad theater just out of friendship.
What was good about her as a playwright?
Many things. I think that she's an incredibly honest writer. I felt that, when you see it right through her last produced play, Third, which Andre did this season, she's ruthless about herself as well as about other people. There are people in her plays that you don't like, that are not likable characters, as well as ones that you love. But she to me was incapable of writing in a false way. She really just captured people, as well as doing things of craft, like being very funny, writing characters that are very touching. And writing characters, I think this is what really sort of hits people in the throat about her work, characters who are unresolved, who don't have the answers, and who, when you think of Heidi and the Heidi Chronicles, sort of trapped between one idea of being a modern woman and another, and not sort of knowing which way to turn, and telling the audience directly, this is the dilemma, and I can't solve it, and I wish I could. It's so so human, and it's so vulnerable, and to me completely real.
Is Heidi Chronicles, which won a Tony and a Pulitzer Prize?
Yes, that's right.
Her best work?
I think it's her most beautifully written play, which is not to say necessarily that I think it's her best work. I was just rereading it a few days ago, having not thought about it for many years and not seen it pretty much since we did it in New York. What strikes me about that play particularly is that each scene, and it takes place year after year, it's not, it takes place over the course of a number of years and a number of friendships. It's just beautifully written. The quality of the writing itself is so beautifully written. So I think it's her it's her best written play. Whether it's her best play, I don't know. I think the play that may last the longest is oddly The Sisters Rosenzweig. Not only because it's so beautifully crafted, but I recently went to a reading of it, and I kind of was dreading, when you do something and it's years ago, and you think, well, going back to it, will it be as good as I remember? You approach it with trepidation. I went to this reading of it that had a few people from the cast that had originally done it, and many others who were new. And I thought for the first time, and perhaps the last time in my life, I thought, this play is better than I thought it was. It was superbly crafted and not so funny the way we all think it was, gorgeous, the character that Madeline Kahn played. It's a very serious play underneath it, and the resonance, the deep resonance and the seriousness of the play came through much better now than it had 10 or whenever it was 12 years ago. And I suspect that's the play that will live on the most. But I think also Third, that had a wonderfully successful run, but not a long run, will be seen to be her most economically written and her wisest and her simplest play.
Which was last year, 2012.
Which was we just closed in December.
Are they autobiographical? I mean, Sisters Rosenzweig, inspired by Chekhov, Three Sisters, yes?
Yes.
But it's her family and her sister.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the things about Wendy, which has been true in all her plays and in her novel that's coming out in April, and in her essays, is that she was an acute observer of
this line that she
well, and her
in Heidi Chronicles later.
Her sister Sandy, who was older and in business, used to say when Wendy would come out with, "Oh, I remember this, I remember that," her sister Sandy would say, "How can you possibly remember all of this?" And Wendy would say, especially about things concerning her family, she would say, "How could I possibly forget?" She remembered everything and used everything because she was aware of everything.
Yeah. But and Heidi's Chronicles was, in part, she said she wrote Heidi Chronicles because, she began to ask those questions herself, right?
You mean questions about?
About what's it about, and what am I doing with my life, and all
so.
of that.
I mean, I think what Frank said was astute, is that all of her plays, really, the leading character is questioning her life and hasn't necessarily come to any resolution. At the end of Third, the play that just closed, and I'm afraid to say her last play, this professor realizes in her mid-50s that many of the things that she had stood for, and many of the things that she had taught, and many of the things that she had believed in had calcified in her, and that she had to re-examine her life. And at the end of the play, she gives up her job at this college, shuts the door, and goes off for parts unknown with no agenda and absolutely no plan as to what to do with the rest of her life.
And Heidi adopts a baby.
But it's all inconclusive. At the end of Isn't It Romantic, Janie Blumberg dances alone with an umbrella, and one doesn't know what is going to happen to these women.
Did she have special resonance, you think, Jane, for women? I mean, among your friends and your generation of women who experienced feminism and at the same time appreciated choices?
Absolutely. I think when you start to, you look at all of these characters, and we were talking before about why that Wendy was so loved, and the outpouring of response to her, and the emails and letters that Lincoln Center has received, that we've all received about her. I think that all these characters were relatable. They went through the struggles, the self-doubt that everybody has. She didn't put anybody on a pedestal.
She could put eloquence in the questions they were asking themselves.
Yes.
Yeah. How did she write, Chris? I mean, writers share the frustration of writing.
Well, let's see, I can think of two things. She wrote the first version of Uncommon Women and Others when we were at Yale together. And actually one of her issues was that the class behind her was 5 men and 1 woman, and after they had a reading of Uncommon Women, one of the male playwrights said, "I can't get into this chick stuff." So he really understandably didn't like that. But because I was getting to know her and she was telling me about all her classmates from Mount Holyoke, Uncommon Women is very much drawn from all those people she met at Mount Holyoke, and she drew upon a number of them, and actually I met a number of the people there. And again, she wasn't writing, carbon copies of them, but and they were actually all her friends, and
assessing their life.
liked being included. So in some ways, I think, she definitely drew from the people in her life, and sometimes I think more directly than many a writer will. Also, in that play, I remember in every version that I saw, the character of Holly was more or less Wendy's stand-in, was funny and charming and very vulnerable. And there's a speech where Holly calls up this doctor she's just met, and she has all these pressures of feeling, I guess a doctor is who you should marry, a doctor or a lawyer or something, blah, 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 but I also want to be independent. But in any case, she's only met the man casually, and she really just opens her heart to him, and clearly it's not been a wise phone call. He doesn't quite remember her. And I just thought, wow, knowing her, I feel this is so... I'm not saying that she literally did that, but I mean, I feel that her emotions did that. And I thought, wow, this is so vulnerable. So I don't know if that's about how she writes, but it's one of them.
There were 2 things we should talk about, too. One is that she used to always laugh and talk about her husbands. Frequently, they were gay friends of hers. And she would say, my husband so-and-so, my husband so-and-so. And she would use that. Secondly, she never married and very much wanted a child and wrote about it. Did she talk about that with you?
Well,
and maybe she talked about Jane, but
she talked about her husbands. Well, I think I was probably one of her husbands.
I think you were. Yes, you
were. So, and I was jealous of all the other husbands. They weren't suitable.
She'd laugh and say, "My husband."
Yes, I mean, she would and she wouldn't. I mean, I think one of the things that's been so interesting in the past few months is that Wendy, and maybe this is true of all of us, was, to go back to something I said earlier, she was a much more complicated person than we thought, and a very private person. And though she had this vast network of friendships, many of whom, such as all of us here knew each other, have known each other for many, many years. She also kept a lot of parts of her life very private. What this one was told something different, or not told the same thing at all. She talked to me about wanting a child, and she tried for many years to have one. And she was always, she would write these plays, and somehow the ending of the plays would be just a step ahead of what actually happened to Wendy in her life. In other words, when Janie Blumberg danced alone, Wendy was just beginning to think that maybe she was going to dance alone, and isn't it romantic? At the end of Heidi Chronicles, Heidi has a child, and that's going to be her new world. That was before Wendy had a child, and that was her new world. And what's, you know, sad beyond any telling is that at the end of Third, the play we just did, the secondary lead, the woman professor who's ill with cancer, at the end of that play, she recovers and cures her cancer and meets a nice rabbi and gets married.
In chemotherapy.
She meets a nice rabbi on
in
a trip
chemotherapy.
and conquers her illness and gets married.
And we all hoped that would be the result, too.
I used to think, because I always thought Wendy knew about, she thought she was infallible about the future and about what was going to happen. I would seize upon the ending of that play with that character and assume, I had no doubts that that was what was going to happen to Wendy. And for the first time it didn't.
I think when you look at all of Wendy's characters, they're alone at the end of the play. But there's one at the end of the plays. But there is one line to describe Heidi, and that is she was fearless, and she was fragile, and she was courageous. And I think that in order to talk about Wendy, you also have to talk about her courage and how courageous she was.
In the face of illness?
I think in the face of life.
And you saw her on...
Well, yes, you know, there was this big party given for the costume designer William Ivey Long last summer at the Central Park Boathouse, and everyone in the theater was invited. It was like 400 people, and Wendy decided that she wanted to perform as part of the tribute to William Ivey Long. So she and her friend, the actress Alma Cuervo, had worked up a satire of a number from Fiddler on the Roof. And it was this striking thing. My wife Alex and I talked about it for days afterwards, that Wendy, when she stood up to this number, addressed this crowd and said, I know I don't look right. I've had Bell's palsy. I've had ailments. But we want to do this number, and I hope you'll bear with me. And then they did the number brilliantly, and it brought down the house. But how many people would, in the condition she was in, really hurting and really because of her ailment, not looking like herself, would stand up and do a performance before, you know, sort of to New York in that way?
There is this also, Elements of Style, a novel by Wendy. Tell me about this. It's going to be released?
Yes, in April, and it's sort of, I've actually only begun it. I haven't finished it. So, Andre, maybe you can say more, but it's a comedy of manners and very much of a New York scene. Oh, perhaps you've read it.
Jane,
it's Wendy's take on chick lit. I mean, Wendy looked at all of these women writing, you know, Candice Bushnell and all of these women writing these great, you know, chick literature, and Wendy said she was going to do it. And
that's what Elements of Style is.
That's what Elements of Style is. You might want to add.
The only difference is that, again, as in her plays, as you'll see, if you know, is that there is an element of darkness in it. Mm-hmm. There's an element of loneliness in it. There's an element which Wendy was, I mean, this book is a perfect sort of summing up of Wendy in many ways, because it's both someone who was on the inside and on the outside looking in. And that was Wendy. She was on the inside and happy to be so, but she also wanted to be a part. And this world she's captured so brilliantly was a world that she knows very well and also had conflicted and ambivalent feelings about.
Her play Old Bunny, it was about this world of wealth and high society and accomplishment in New York. And And Wendy knew that world, but yet very much standing outside it and satirizing it and asking tough questions about it.
This book is called Elements of Style, a novel, and she says, my father, Morris Wasserstein, arrived at Ellis Island at age 7 in 1928. He lived the next 75 years of life in New York City. I'm grateful for his belief in the promise of New York and its people, which she did. I'm eternally grateful to my 5-year-old daughter, Lucy Jane, for her love, foresight, and courage in taking me as a mother to the best pediatricians in New York. Jane, she wrote about this. The child was important for her. She spent 8 years wanting to have Lucy Jane.
I think when you go back and you look at where all of her characters were at the end of her plays, they're all alone. And there were times where we'd talk and it was, yes, she wished for a husband, whatever, but all of these things that she did, talking to the Jews of everywhere, it didn't keep you warm at night. And
but you couldn't have dinner with your principals.
No, it didn't keep you warm at night. And I feel there was, as much as she had so many friends, but there was a part of Wendy that no matter how much of a hug you could give her, no matter how many dinners we all sat and had with her, she was very lonely. And having a child filled that void in a very profound way. And I think that Lucy Jane is her finest production.
Yeah, well said. Do you remember when you found out she was ill?
I found out kind of late, actually. I'd known she'd been having physical different symptoms, and I was worried about them, but I didn't think it was life-threatening. And then she was in rehearsal for Third, and I was in rehearsal for 2 other plays I was doing in Philadelphia and in Princeton. And I emailed her, and I was starting not to hear back from her. And actually, she wasn't the fastest with email because she had so many friends.
Yes, exactly.
And going places, it was hard. So I wasn't exactly worried, but then I started to be, and I saw Third, and I really loved it, and I called her up and left a message. And then a couple days later, maybe a week later, I called Andre's office, and I spoke to his assistant, Julia, and just said, is Wendy okay? I'm not hearing back. And she said that actually she wasn't okay. Actually, I think at that point they were just about to start some treatments, which they had hopes for. But so truthfully, well, anyway, so I learned late, and then the next I heard she was really very ill. So it was certainly sad. There wasn't for a lot of us, and certainly for me, there wasn't really a lead up of talking to her. Although in retrospect, I realized that some of these ailments she was having were connected to the underlying cancer that we didn't know about. Yeah.
There was a line from Heidi that you took a note of. I expected to know you all my life.
It was when Peter and Heidi meet in the beginning of the play, and they have sort of a playful flirtation, and it's like a mock thing. He says, I want to know you all my life. If we can't marry, let's be great, great friends. And then later in the play, when he's terribly depressed due to a partner of his dying of AIDS, and Heidi's terribly depressed because of what's been going on in her life, and she's about to leave. Anyway, she's going to leave town, and then suddenly decides she can't leave town because Peter's too sad. And she says, I want to know you all your life. So I had said in just my statement when she died that I had expected to know her all my life, and was just so sad that she left so soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. Thank you. Thank you, Jane. Wendy Wasserstein, a friend to us, for all of us, for all the reasons and more that the world, as we have noted this evening, loved her. To know her was a great, great joy. And I certainly consider myself among those who whose life was better because of it, and I know everybody here who had deeper and earlier friendships. And we expected to know her for a long time, and it went much too early. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Funding for Charlie Rose has been provided by the following.
No one from these isolated villages in China had ever attended university until the Coca-Cola system funded 1,000 first-generation scholarships for students to fulfill their college dreams, satisfying a thirst for opportunity. The Coca-Cola Company.
Charlie Rose on PBS is brought to you in part by JP Morgan Chase, providing financial services and solutions to more than 30 million consumers, institutions, corporations, and governments worldwide.
Additional funding for Charlie Rose was also provided by these funders.
And by Bloomberg, a provider of multimedia news and information services worldwide.